There is a question almost every man asks at some point in his life. Why him? Why does she obsess over that man while ignoring others who are kinder, more available, and more invested? Why does her attention loop around certain men long after the interaction ends? Why do some men linger in her mind without trying while others disappear no matter how hard they try? The answer has nothing to do with looks, nothing to do with money, nothing to do with clever words, and it has everything to do with how desire actually forms. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Women do not obsess over men who give them everything. They obsess over men who leave something unfinished. Desire does not grow from satisfaction, it grows from tension. Not toxic tension, psychological tension. The kind that keeps the mind engaged even when the person is absent. Most men think obsession comes from intensity, from passion, from constant attention, from emotional availability. But intensity fades. Obsession lingers. And obsession is born when the nervous system cannot fully resolve a person. Certain men trigger this response naturally, not because they are mysterious on purpose, but because they are emotionally self-contained. They do not leak their inner world. They do not rush to define the dynamic. They do not anchor their emotional state to her reactions. And because of that, her mind keeps returning to them, not consciously, instinctively. Here's something most men never realize. A woman's mind is constantly scanning for emotional reference points, something solid, something grounded, something that doesn't move when pressure appears. When she encounters a man who remains steady regardless of outcome, her attention sharpens, because stability in a noisy emotional world feels rare, and rarity pulls focus. This is where obsession begins, not with desire, with orientation. Her thoughts start orienting around him. What is he thinking? Why didn't he react? Why does he seem unaffected? These questions are not confusion, they are attachment forming. Most men accidentally destroy this process. They rush to reassure, they rush to clarify, they rush to make sure she feels wanted. And the moment they do, the unresolved tension disappears, and with it, obsession. Another truth most men don't want to hear is this: women obsess over men who don't need them emotionally. Not because they want to be unneeded, but because emotional independence feels safe. When a man does not rely on her attention to feel complete, she feels free to invest. Freedom allows desire to move. Pressure shuts it down. This is why obsession never forms around men who constantly seek validation. Validation seeking collapses polarity, and polarity is the engine of desire. Another deep psychological mechanism is this. Women obsess over men who do not give emotional closure too quickly. Closure feels calming, but calm ends pursuit. The mind stops searching. The men women obsess over leave emotional loops open, not by manipulation, by restraint. They don't answer every question. They don't reveal every feeling. They don't explain themselves to be understood. And because of that, the mind stays engaged. Another uncomfortable realization is that obsession is not created by being perfect. It's created by being consistent and incomplete. Consistent in values, incomplete in emotional access. This balance is rare. Most men are either fully available or completely withdrawn. Neither creates obsession. One creates boredom, the other creates fear. Obsession lives in the middle. Another truth is this: women obsess over men who don't emotionally chase alignment. Most men try to sync feelings, they mirror moods, they adjust energy, they constantly calibrate to stay connected. This makes them predictable. Predictability relaxes attention. The men women obsess over remain themselves regardless of her emotional state. That creates polarity. Polarity sustains focus. Another layer is how women experience emotional investment. Investment doesn't begin with action, it begins with mental occupation. When a man occupies her thoughts without trying, obsession is already forming. And this only happens when the man does not try to occupy her thoughts. Trying reveals need. Need collapses intrigue. Another uncomfortable truth is that women obsess over men who are not afraid of silence. Silence creates space. Space invites projection. Projection fuels obsession. Men who fill every gap leave nothing to imagine. Another deep psychological insight is this: women obsess over men who are comfortable being misunderstood, not because misunderstanding is good, but because it creates curiosity. Curiosity pulls attention inward. The men who rush to be understood remove curiosity, and without curiosity, obsession cannot exist. Another realization is that obsession forms when emotional access feels earned, not given. Men who give everything immediately feel disposable. Men who give selectively feel valuable. Value pulls attention. Another truth most men resist is this: obsession grows when a man is willing to lose the interaction without resentment. Resentment signals dependence. Calm detachment signals self-respect. Self-respect is magnetic. Another layer is emotional pacing. Men women obsess over do not rush intimacy. They let it develop, not because they're cautious, but because they are not trying to extract something. Extraction kills desire. Presence sustains it. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession is strongest when a man does not interpret interest as obligation. Interest is received calmly, not grabbed, not secured. Calm reception keeps the dynamic alive. Another realization is that women obsess over men who are internally stable during emotional highs and lows. If excitement rises, he stays grounded. If distance appears, he remains calm. That consistency becomes a reference point. Reference points attract focus. Another deep truth is this: obsession does not feel dramatic to the woman. It feels subtle, a thought here, a check-in there, a sense of pull she can't explain. And the moment a man tries to capitalize on it, it fades. The men women obsess over never try to own the obsession. They allow it, because obsession is not something you create. It is something you don't interrupt. This is the foundation, because once you understand why women obsess, you stop trying to be the man everyone wants, and you start becoming the man certain women cannot stop thinking about. Not through effort, but through emotional solidity. This is where desire stops being loud and starts becoming deep. And this is only the beginning. Once obsession begins forming, the dynamic quietly changes. She is no longer responding to you. She is anticipating you. And anticipation is far more powerful than reaction. Most men never realize when this shift happens, because it doesn't announce itself. There is no confession, no dramatic signal, no obvious milestone. Instead, her attention starts arriving before you do. She thinks about how you'll respond. She imagines what you'll say. She replays moments that felt unresolved. This is obsession taking root, and it only happens when the man does not rush to satisfy emotional curiosity. Most men mistake curiosity for a problem to solve. They clarify, they explain, they reassure. And in doing so, they remove the very tension that fuels obsession. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women obsess over men who do not emotionally close doors too early. When a man labels the connection, defines the future, or locks in certainty, obsession fades, because the story feels finished. The mind stops circling finished stories, it circles open ones. Another layer is how women respond to men who do not chase emotional resolution after tension. When tension appears, most men try to resolve it immediately. They apologize, they explain, they over-communicate. The men women obsess over allow tension to exist calmly, not to punish, but because they trust the connection can breathe. That trust feels powerful. Another uncomfortable realization is that obsession increases when a man does not seek emotional permission. He does not ask if it's okay to take space. He does not ask how she feels about every move. He simply behaves in alignment with himself. Alignment creates certainty. Certainty creates safety. Safety allows obsession to deepen. Another truth is this: women obsess over men who do not emotionally merge too quickly. Merging feels intimate, but it dissolves polarity. Polarity fuels desire. The men women obsess over remain emotionally distinct. They share moments, not identities. Another layer is emotional scarcity. Not manufactured scarcity, natural scarcity created by a full life. A man whose world does not revolve around her becomes a mental anchor. She senses there is more to him, and the unknown pulls her attention inward. Another uncomfortable truth is that women obsess over men who do not emotionally punish distance. If she pulls back and he becomes cold, obsession breaks. If she pulls back and he remains grounded, obsession strengthens. Because calm during distance signals strength. Strength stabilizes desire. Another deep mechanism is emotional selectivity. Men women obsess over are selective with attention, not indiscriminate, not desperate. Selective attention feels valuable. Value pulls focus. Another truth most men miss is that obsession grows when a man does not chase momentum. When things go well, he does not accelerate, he maintains pace. Acceleration feels like hunger. Hunger repels. Steady pace sustains intrigue. Another realization is that women obsess over men who don't emotionally explain themselves when misunderstood. Misunderstanding creates curiosity. Curiosity fuels obsession. The man who rushes to be understood kills intrigue. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women obsess over men who do not try to be unforgettable. Trying reveals insecurity. Security does not need to perform. The man who is simply himself becomes unforgettable by accident. Another layer is how women respond to emotional boundaries. Boundaries do not repel obsession, they deepen it, because boundaries signal self-respect. Self-respect anchors attention. Another deep truth is that obsession forms when a man does not emotionally reward every investment immediately. Delayed emotional payoff keeps engagement alive. Not punishment, not games, just non-rush. Another uncomfortable realization is that women obsess over men who do not interpret attention as ownership. Attention is enjoyed, not claimed. Claiming collapses tension, enjoying preserves it. Another layer is emotional autonomy. If she senses that her behavior does not control your emotional state, obsession strengthens. Control removes intrigue. Autonomy creates pull. Another truth is this: women obsess over men who are internally still. Still during excitement, still during uncertainty, still during silence. That stillness becomes a reference point, and reference points attract mental energy. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession cannot be demanded. It can only be allowed. Allowed through restraint, allowed through patience, allowed through emotional self-trust. Another realization is that obsession deepens when a man is willing to lose the interaction without bitterness. Bitterness reveals attachment. Calm acceptance reveals freedom. Freedom is magnetic. Another layer is emotional leadership. Leadership here means not being emotionally pulled by every signal. The man who holds his emotional center becomes the axis, and the mind or its axes. This is why obsession does not form around men who chase. Chasing flips the orbit. Another deep truth is that obsession feels safe when the man is emotionally predictable in character, but unpredictable in access. She knows who you are. She does not know how much of you she has. That balance keeps her engaged. Another uncomfortable realization is that obsession grows when you stop monitoring it. Monitoring creates tension. Tension leaks. The man who trusts the dynamic lets it deepen naturally. This is where most men fail. They feel obsession forming and try to secure it, and in that moment, it dissolves. The men women obsess over never try to hold it. They allow it to exist. Because obsession does not want to be captured. It wants to move, and the man who gives it space becomes the one it moves toward. Quietly, persistently, without force. This is how obsession stops being accidental and starts being predictable. Not through tactics, but through emotional containment. And once you understand this, the question stops being why him and becomes why not you? Because nothing here requires perfection, only self-mastery. And the men who master themselves become impossible to forget. As obsession deepens, something even more subtle begins to happen. Her emotional attention stops reacting to external triggers. and starts responding to internal momentum. She doesn't need reminders. She doesn't need stimulation. She doesn't need constant interaction. Her mind keeps returning on its own. This is the point where most men sabotage everything without realizing it. They sense the pull, they feel the shift, and instead of holding their position, they lean into it. They get more access, more reassurance, more emotional availability. And the moment they do, obsession weakens. Because obsession is not fed by availability, it is fed by contrast. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women obsess over men who do not emotionally arrive. Arrival feels like completion. Completion ends pursuit. The men women obsess over always feel slightly ahead emotionally, not distant, not unreachable, just not fully claimed. This creates forward movement in her mind. Another deep psychological mechanism at play here is projection. When a man does not reveal everything about himself, her mind fills in the gaps. She imagines, she interprets, she assigns meaning. Projection is the engine of obsession. Men who explain everything remove the need for imagination, and without imagination, obsession cannot survive. Another layer is emotional restraint during vulnerability. When she opens up emotionally, most men rush to bond. They mirror, they reassure, they merge. Merging feels intimate, but it collapses polarity. The men women obsess over listen without collapsing into the moment. They are present, but not absorbed. That containment keeps tension alive. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession grows when a man does not emotionally reward effort immediately. When she invests emotionally and the reward is instant, the loop closes. When the reward is calm and measured, the loop stays open. Open loops keep the mind engaged. Another layer is emotional selectivity. Men women obsess over do not give their emotional energy to everyone. They are warm, but selective. Selectivity signals value. Value attracts fixation. Another truth most men resist is this: obsession forms when a man does not emotionally chase momentum. When things feel good, he does not escalate. He does not push forward. He stays steady. Steadiness during positive emotion feels powerful because it signals abundance. Another deep psychological insight is this: women obsess over men who are comfortable being slightly out of sync emotionally. Most men try to sync constantly. They match excitement, they match concern, they match vulnerability. This creates emotional flatness. The men women obsess over listen without collapsing into the moment. They are present, but not absorbed. That containment keeps tension alive. Another uncomfortable realization is that obsession grows when a man does not emotionally frame the connection. No labels, no premature meaning, no defining speeches. Meaning that emerges naturally lasts longer than meaning that is assigned. Another layer is how women respond to emotional dignity. Dignity is how you behave when you could chase, but don't. That restraint is felt instantly, and restraint pulls attention inward. Another truth is this: women obsess over men who do not emotionally collapse into reassurance seeking. Asking, "Where do I stand?" kills obsession because it transfers uncertainty from her to you. Obsession requires uncertainty to remain on her side. Another deep mechanism is emotional patience. Patience is not waiting. It is confidence that time is working for you. Men who trust time feel grounded. Grounded men become mental anchors. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession grows when a man does not emotionally punish distance. Distance is not taken personally, it is observed calmly. Calm observation signals strength. Strength stabilizes fixation. Another layer is emotional autonomy. If she senses that her behavior does not dictate your mood, obsession strengthens. Control removes intrigue. Autonomy restores it. Another truth is this: women obsess over men who do not emotionally cash in attraction. They don't secure it. They don't lock it. They let it exist. Existence without ownership creates freedom. Freedom invites deeper attachment. Another uncomfortable realization is that obsession is strongest when a man does not interpret interest as urgency. Urgency feels like fear. Fear repels desire. The man who remains relaxed during interest becomes unforgettable. Another deep insight is that obsession is sustained by emotional integrity. Integrity means your actions match your inner state. No performance, no strategy, just alignment. Women sense alignment instantly, and alignment feels safe to fixate on. Another truth most men miss is that obsession grows when you stop trying to be the cause of it. Causation implies control. Control kills a mystery. The man who is not trying to cause obsession allows it to form naturally. Another uncomfortable realization is that obsession fades the moment a man tries to own it. Ownership ends curiosity. Curiosity fuels obsession. Another layer is emotional leadership. Leadership here means holding your emotional position even when pulled. Pulled by attention, pulled by attraction, pulled by validation. The man who does not move becomes the reference point, and reference points attract fixation. Another deep truth is this: women obsess over men who do not emotionally collapse into certainty. Certainty feels calming, but calm ends pursuit. A little unresolved energy keeps the mind alive. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession cannot survive emotional need. Need leaks. Leakage is felt instantly. The man who needs nothing creates space. Space allows obsession to grow. Another realization is that obsession is not dramatic. It is quiet, persistent, background. And the moment you try to bring it to the foreground, it fades. The men women obsess over never try to spotlight it. They let it live where it grows best, in silence, in space, in imagination. This is why obsession feels irrational, because it does not come from logic. It comes from unresolved emotional gravity. And once that gravity exists, it pulls again and again without effort, without force, without words. This is where desire stops being reactive and becomes self-sustaining. And once it reaches this point, it doesn't matter what other men do, because her attention has already found its center, and it keeps returning, on its own. This is where obsession becomes inevitable, not because you engineered it, but because nothing in you blocked it. And most men never reach the stage, not because it's difficult, but because it requires letting go of control. And control is what obsession quietly resists. This is where the psychology becomes clear. Desire does not obey effort, it obeys emotional gravity. And gravity only forms around men who remain whole, untouched, centered, and just out of reach emotionally. That is why him, and that is how obsession truly works. At this stage, obsession no longer depends on interaction. It exists, even in absence. This is where most men misunderstand what's happening. They think obsession requires maintenance, more texts, more presence, more reminders. In reality, maintenance kills obsession. Obsession survives on internal momentum, not external input. The men women obsess over understand this instinctively. They don't chase contact. They don't fill space. They let silence work, because silence gives her mind room to return on its own. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women obsess over men who don't emotionally reward consistency. Consistency feels good, but consistency without contrast creates emotional flatness. The man who is always available becomes predictable. Predictability relaxes attention. The man who is reliably grounded, but not always accessible, keeps attention alert. Alertness sustains obsession. Another deep mechanism is emotional unpredictability layered over moral predictability. She knows your character, she knows your values, but she doesn't know how emotionally available you'll be in any given moment. This creates safe uncertainty, and safe uncertainty keeps the mind engaged. Another truth most men never accept is this: obsession grows when a man does not emotionally track her behavior. Tracking creates pressure. Pressure leaks. The man who is not tracking feels free. Freedom is magnetic. Another layer is emotional economy. Men women obsess over do not overpay emotionally. They don't give too much too soon. They let investment balance itself. Balanced investment creates tension. Tension fuels fixation. Another uncomfortable realization is that obsession deepens when a man does not emotionally collapse into exclusivity prematurely. Exclusivity without depth feels like containment. Containment ends desire. The man who lets exclusivity emerge organically keeps obsession alive. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession grows when a man does not emotionally punish mixed signals. Punishment feels controlling. Control kills fascination. Acceptance without chasing keeps curiosity alive. Another layer is emotional patience under ambiguity. Ambiguity is where obsession grows. Men who rush to clarify ambiguity end obsession. Men who tolerate ambiguity calmly become unforgettable. Another truth is this: women obsess over men who do not emotionally compete for vulnerability. Competition reveals insecurity. Security does not compete. It exists. Another deep psychological insight is that obsession strengthens when a man does not emotionally collapse into exclusivity prematurely. Exclusivity without depth feels like containment. Containment ends desire. The man who lets exclusivity emerge organically keeps obsession alive. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession grows when you do not emotionally punish mixed signals. Punishment feels controlling. Control kills fascination. Acceptance without chasing keeps curiosity alive. Another layer is emotional patience under ambiguity. Ambiguity is where obsession grows. Men who rush to clarify ambiguity end obsession. Men who tolerate ambiguity calmly become unforgettable. Another truth is this: women obsess over men who do not emotionally compete for exclusivity. Exclusivity without depth feels like containment. Containment ends desire. The man who lets exclusivity emerge organically keeps obsession alive. Another uncountable realization is that obsession deepens when a man does not emotionally collapse into reassurance seeking during distance. Distance is not rejection, it is space. Space allows projection. Projection fuels obsession. Another layer is emotional selectivity over time. Men women obsess over do not give their emotional energy endlessly. They are present, but not consumed. This creates value. Value attracts fixation. Another truth most men miss is this: obsession grows when a man does not emotionally narrate the relationship. Narration turns experience into analysis. Analysis kills emotion. The man who lets experience remain felt keeps obsession alive. Another uncomfortable realization is that obsession cannot survive emotional entitlement. Entitlement feels heavy. Lightness feels attractive. The man who expects nothing receives more. Another layer is emotional congruence. When your inner state matches your outward behavior, obsession feels safe. Incongruence creates distrust. Trust allows fixation. Another deep truth is this: women obsess over men who are internally still, even when desired. Most men change when they are wanted. They soften, they lean, they secure. The men women obsess over remain unchanged because their identity is not shaped by attraction. That constancy becomes the anchor. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession fades the moment a man becomes emotionally predictable after winning interest. Winning interest is not the end. Treating it like the end ends everything. The men women obsess over never treat attraction as a finish line. They treat it as movement. Movement continues. Another layer is emotional leadership through non-action. Leadership is knowing when not to respond, not to escalate, not to define. That restraint keeps fixation alive. Another deep realization is that obsession is sustained by emotional self-trust. When you trust yourself, you don't rush. When you don't rush, obsession deepens. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession forms around men who are not afraid to lose momentum. Fear of loss drives mistakes. Men who are okay with loss remain attractive. Another layer is emotional sovereignty. Sovereignty means no one else controls your emotional state. Sovereign men become psychological centers, and minds orbit centers. Another truth is this: obsession is not something you do to a woman. It is something that happens around a man who does not interfere. Interference comes from need. Need blocks fixation. Another uncomfortable realization is that obsession strengthens when a man does not emotionally collapse into meaning-making. Meaning emerges naturally. Forcing it kills desire. Another deep truth is that obsession thrives on unresolved emotional presence that is felt even when absent, and that presence only exists when a man is internally complete. This is where obsession becomes self-sustaining, because it no longer depends on interaction. It depends on internal reference. And once you become an internal reference point, attention keeps returning, not because you pulled it, but because it found a place to rest. This is why obsession feels irrational, because it is not logical, it is neurological. And once the nervous system finds stability combined with mystery, it stays engaged, quietly, persistently, without effort. This is where desire stops needing fuel and becomes its own source. This is the level most men never reach, not because it's complicated, but because it requires letting go of control. And control is the one thing obsession refuses to obey. This is where the psychology of desire reveals itself fully, not as something you manipulate, but as something you allow, by becoming the man who does not leak himself emotionally. And once you become that man, obsession no longer feels rare. It becomes predictable and effortless and deeply human. At the deepest level, this is why obsession feels mysterious to most men, because it does not respond to effort, it responds to emotional position. The men women obsess over are not trying to be unforgettable. They are simply not abandoning themselves emotionally. They remain intact, and integrity is rare. Most men believe obsession comes from being chosen. In reality, obsession forms when a woman feels she is the one orienting, when her thoughts move first, when her attention returns on its own. That only happens when the man does not need the outcome. Need is loud. Need disrupts presence. Presence without need becomes gravity. Another uncomfortable truth is this: obsession collapses the moment a man tries to own it. Ownership feels final. Finality ends movement. The men women obsess over never try to secure the dynamic. They allow it to stay alive. Alive means unfinished. Unfinished means engaging. Another deep truth is that obsession is not about dominance. It is about emotional self-trust. The man who trusts himself does not rush. The man who does not rush becomes memorable. Another realization is that obsession fades the moment a man seeks reassurance. Reassurance transfers uncertainty from her to him. Obsession requires uncertainty to remain on her side. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession does not coexist with emotional dependence. Dependence leaks fear. Fear repels desire. The man who is okay without her attention becomes the one her attention seeks. Another layer is emotional dignity. Dignity is how you behave when you could chase, but don't. That restraint is felt instantly, and restraint is magnetic. Another deep realization is this: women obsess over men who do not let attraction change who they are. Most men soften, they lean, they adapt. The men women obsess over remain unchanged because their identity is not shaped by desire. That stability becomes the anchor. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession grows when a man does not interpret silence as rejection. Silence becomes space. Space allows imagination. Imagination fuels fixation. Another layer is emotional sovereignty. When no one else controls your emotional state, your presence becomes safe to focus on. Safety allows obsession to deepen. Another realization is that obsession thrives when a man does not emotionally narrate the relationship. Narration kills feeling. Feeling sustains desire. Another uncomfortable truth is that obsession cannot be engineered. It can only be allowed. Allowed through patience, allowed through restraint, allowed through self-mastery. Another deep truth is this: the men women obsess over are not better. They are simply less reactive, less needy, less urgent, less afraid. And those absences create space. Space invites attention. Attention becomes fixation. Fixation becomes obsession. This is why obsession does not respond to tactics. It responds to who you are when nothing is happening, who you are in silence, who you are in uncertainty, who you are when there is no validation. That is where desire decides. Another uncomfortable realization is that obsession ends the moment you try to become someone else to keep it. Trying reveals insecurity. Insecurity collapses attraction. The man who remains himself remains compelling. Another deep truth is that obsession is not dramatic. It is quiet, persistent, background. And the moment you try to make it visible, it fades. The men women obsess over never spotlight it. They let it live where it grows best, in space, in silence, in imagination. This is why the question stops being why him and becomes how centered is he? Because obsession does not choose men randomly. It responds to emotional gravity. And gravity only forms around men who are whole. Now, if this video helped you understand why women obsess over certain men and why desire forms beneath logic, there is one video you should watch next. Because this psychology did not begin today. It was observed centuries ago by someone who understood human nature without illusion. And that's exactly what I break down in my video called Machiavelli's Darkest Secret About Women Finally Explained. That video shows how self-mastery creates attraction, why emotional position matters more than intention, and how desire responds to strength of self. Watch that next, because once you understand both modern desire psychology and Machiavelli's insight, attraction stops feeling confusing. It becomes predictable. Not because you manipulate, but because you stop interfering. And when you stop interfering, desire moves on its own, quietly, naturally, without resistance. That is why him, and that is how obsession truly works.